In this video, we'll dive into the techniques and benefits of one-point perspective. It's a powerful, yet often very underestimated technique. Many art students dismiss its usefulness, thinking that it's too simple and too easy. I believe that's a mistake. Just because something is simple and easy doesn't make it any less useful. You just have to know the right moments when to use it. Whether you're into concept art or visual design, one-point perspective offers an accessible and effective way to showcase your designs with clarity and impact. So here I'm going to share my top tips and tricks in using this technique. These tips will make the art process easier and faster, while emphasizing the key compositional elements you need to be aware of when using the one-point perspective. The most important tip is to know when to use the one-point perspective in the first place. Sure, two-point perspective or three-point perspective, they might be more advanced techniques, but they aren't always better. Think about this station design, for example. Here, the most interesting part about this whole design is the silhouette of the station. If I had chosen a different type of a perspective or camera angle to show this design, it would be more difficult to read in this picture. The one-point perspective here is not only the easiest way to show this design, but it is the most impactful way to show this design as well. So think about what you want to show through your artwork, and then choose the right method on creating perspective for that. And sometimes the easiest way is the best way. To get started on one-point perspective, draw a straight line across your canvas to represent the horizon. Where you place that line is the biggest decision you will make for your composition. By placing the horizon line up, you are making the viewer look down. I'm giving the viewer a slight upward tilt by placing it low like this. Think about your camera angle always like you are casting your viewer into a role. So here, you already want to be thinking about where you want to direct their attention. My tip here is to avoid placing a line right in the middle of the canvas, because then you are making the viewer figure out where or what they should be looking at. Remember, it's important to paint in a kind way, inviting your viewer into your world and the story you're building. This principle applies not only to perspective, but also to any visual problem-solving situation. Whenever you're having a visual problem that you need to solve, think about what would be the kindest way to convey this information to your viewer, and that is usually the best way to tell that story. Now at this point I need to make a really quick disclaimer, otherwise I would feel so fake making this video, because when I started making this illustration, at halfway point I just felt like this is a complete disaster and I'm not going to be able to salvage this, because it took so long. Just because these techniques are easy and simple to learn doesn't mean that they happen just like in one sitting. I worked on this illustration for 33 hours. So I hope that you will put that into perspective when you start your artwork and when you are using perspective, especially if it's your first time trying this technique, please start simple. Don't make this too difficult for yourself. However, the benefit of these tips and tricks is that I was just following them to dig myself out of that hole, and in the end, it was super rewarding to finish this illustration, but I have to say, in the middle point, I did feel like this is going nowhere, this is a complete disaster, and I had to just trust the process. So I trust these techniques with my life, and I spent all that time just knowing that in the end it will be worth it. Now that we have decided where our horizon line is with design intent, let's place our vanishing point. When using the one-point perspective, you can also point the camera directly up or down, and in those cases, the horizon line won't be part of your image at all. When placing this point, it doesn't have to be right in the middle of your canvas, but a good rule of thumb is to imagine this sort of circle in the middle of your working area, and the point should go within these boundaries. Think of a box in one-point perspective image. If the vanishing point leaves this circle, the box starts looking deformed. It's no longer a cube. If you want to add another point to fix this, then it's no longer a one-point perspective illustration. I could complicate this advice by giving all kinds of mathematical formulas on how to make this circle, but you should not overthink this. Here are some simple examples of different aspect ratios. You can do this. Just think about the middle area of your canvas and place your vanishing point in that area. Now let's go into perspective guides. Edit perspective guide and slap that vanishing point in. My favorite shortcut in Procreate is to go into Preferences and set this button between brush scale and opacity as the toggle for drawing assist. This way, every time you touch it, you can easily switch between free drawing mode and having the lines locked into perspective. When you are in assisted drawing mode, remember that you can also lock lines to perfectly vertical and horizontal lines, so you are not limited to these diagonal lines that lead into your vanishing point. And this is extra helpful, especially when you're working in one-point perspective. Now, wasn't that simple? Now that you can draw a box, you can draw literally anything in perspective using this box as a guide. If there's a shape that seems challenging, you can start by sketching a simple bounding box for it. This technique makes it easier to position even round shapes like arcs accurately within your scene. Utilize free transform with your vanishing point. In free transform mode, any shape on a layer transforms into a rectangle. Simply grab and hold the edges of the shape and pull them along your perspective lines. When you're doing this, don't worry about the scale. Focus on aligning the edges to your perspective lines. Having vertical lines in your piece can assist in this process, because the right and left edges should be perfectly vertical. Once the shape is in perspective, use the middle grab points, these ones, to move and scale it to your desired position. Notice how during this scaling, the shape stays in perfect perspective all the time. Remember the basic scaling rules. Always draw the shape bigger than needed and scale it down. Never scale up. Also, make sure to use bicubic scaling mode right here for operations like this to achieve the best results. Now let's talk about reference, because I often get asked if I use reference in my illustrations, especially when I'm doing original designs such as this one. And the answer is always yes, especially when I'm drawing something that I haven't drawn before. Of course, I take reference pictures with my phone all the time. Now, the way that people understand the word reference, I think, is completely wrong to how I actually use them. So these are, for example, reference pictures that I have taken for this station design. I look at these as a source of ideas and inspiration. These reference pictures are not the ideas nor the final result. So there would be no point in me replicating these details in my illustration. They serve just as a starting point for ideas that fit in my design. And this is a different looking station than my reference points, so think of your reference as a starting point. And when it comes to small practical details that can give a design like this a sense of place, I find that these sort of reference images are essential. When it comes to signage, the way that the wires are connected, and all of those technical details that I can't remember from the top of my head, then these reference images are a great place to get those details right. Doesn't mean that I need to replicate a photograph, but they are a starting point for something that is going to be part of my own design. Because I have my own story to tell, those stations already exist. So this sort of reference I use all the time, and I take tons and tons of pictures whenever I see anything even remotely interesting. Notice that when you are doing design work, reference pictures are just a source for ideas. They are not the ideas themselves. They are a source for ideas. There's a difference. When I'm taking these sort of reference images, I love old railway stations here in Finland. And that's the reason why I take these pictures. I wasn't even thinking about doing a painting, but I have just a massive collection of these sort of detail photos on my phone, and they were a great help in creating this illustration. When I was building this structure, I thought of this side of the building being an older part of the station, so it has more storage space and houses all the ticket sale booths that now have been turned into commercial space, because you can just buy tickets on your phone, or on this machine that I placed on the platform. This is my favorite part of this work, thinking about different imaginary characters and how they move through my spaces. I found instructions online for how to repair old station buildings, and this way I was able to see even more designs for window shapes, and the way that these wood details are placed. Again, these are just starting points when I think about my painting. I don't copy these elements because I need to be aware of how much attention every single detail requires from the viewer. And that brings us to my next point. Use attention like currency. All details, saturated areas, contrasty areas, all of those call for attention. You have to use those moments to call for attention with purpose. Again, be kind in asking for your viewers' attention. Don't make every part of the image ask for their time by adding high contrast, saturated, detailed elements there. Make it easy for them to find what you want to show them. Remember that diagonals are tracks for the eye movement. In this piece, that's true literally, but I don't mean just the train tracks here. Every one of these diagonal lines pointing to the same direction acts like an arrow, and you can use these to your advantage. I'm sorry for doing this with my face, but when I do this, isn't it almost impossible to look anywhere else because of all these lines, these arrows are pointing at me. Diagonals are a powerful but easy to use tools for any kind of painting, but when you have them in your illustration, you also have to check where you are leading the eye so that you don't accidentally leave your viewers outside of your picture plane. Use the opacity and thickness controls of the perspective grid in Procreate. In this video, we learned the difference between typical and optical blending, and that's why having your grid on at all times can easily make you misjudge what kind of colors you need or what kind of colors you are already using. This is extra important with one-point perspective since the densest coverage happens right in the middle of your piece. So you need to turn that grid off every now and then to see what is happening there and how it affects your entire illustration. A secret trick you can use here is that drawing assist toggle. Remember that drawing assist can work even if you don't actually see the perspective grid on your painting. When you press that quick button, you just see this little notification at the top of your screen telling you if it's on or off. Okay, let's get into more advanced territory here. Use the perspective grid with your shadows as well. The same way we can determine the shape of these hidden lines, we can also figure out where the shadows land on ground, like this vertical line. Now all we need is a second reference point, and we can determine where this more complex shadow is happening. This is a very powerful way to sell the three-dimensionality and the reality of your world, and to communicate the mood of your world. Having said that, now comes the dangerous part of this advice that I need to attach some age ratings. Anyway, proceed at your own peril, I guess. You can get away with quite a lot of cheating regarding shadows. When it comes to my art and my style, I look for opportunities for visual appeal in the way I place lights. Now sure, it's nice if there's a way to paint them in a way that's accurate to the scene, but whenever there's a way to make the lighting highlight my design, the mood of the piece, or direct the eye in a way that benefits the composition, in those cases, I bend the rules if it makes the work look or feel better. On general terms, and the reason why giving this sort of advice is so difficult is because paintings and art, they are not legal depositions. Truth matters, but in your art, it's about your truth. What is the most authentic and real way to tell your story? I think that should take priority over all of these tips and tricks. I'm sure that there's a realistic way to show this train station design, but with these lights, I want to show it in a romantic way, the way that I see it. Because there's a reason why I'm making this illustration in the first place. My truth that I want to show with this art is that I think that old stations are beautiful, and I want you to notice that. I wish that even the new buildings that we are building today, the new stations that are being built all around this country, would still have these sort of beautiful aesthetic values that are part of people's everyday lives. That's what I want everybody to see. So that's why the lights in this illustration, they are not just decorations, they are the whole story of what I'm saying with this whole piece. If there's one main thing that I want you to learn from this video, and there isn't, you could make a whole art course from each one of these tips and become an art beast. Anyway, the most important tip that I cannot stress enough is this thing that I skipped in the beginning. As simple as this 1-point perspective is, do not design your sketch in perfect perspective. The beginning looks messy, and there's a reason for it. I don't have the perspective grid on, I don't have the vanishing point lines there, I'm just focusing on the design. In my life, I have taught enough concept art classes to know that when students do this 1-point perspective assignment, their work quickly looks like a stack of boxes. There's also a straightforward way to avoid this, so there's no reason to ever fall into this trap. Just sketch the entire thing by doing a rough estimation of the perspective and focus all of your attention on the story, mood, and the design of the painting. That's also the way that I designed this station before I got into details such as perspective. And yes, I make a ton of mistakes. Every single diagonal line needed to be fixed later when I started getting into details. However, with this technique, that part is super easy, all it takes is patience. This whole painting took over 30 hours. All of that time, I relied on these techniques to get me to the end. Even when it didn't look like it will ever turn into anything, there are no other hidden techniques to it. But if I wasn't happy with the design of the idea in the beginning, it would have been almost impossible to keep going and put all that time and effort into building a world that I don't believe in anymore. I hope it's clear at this point that I really love this train station. And what I'm trying to say with this is that let yourself be obsessed with your work. Don't be afraid to fall in love with it, and don't be ashamed of being excited by what you're making. Some people think that it's cool to complain about the process or your skill level, but trust me, that stuff doesn't help you finish any more paintings. I've done my fair share of complaining about my art, and it didn't yield any better results. So you might just skip all that negativity and get to the fun part with art. Perspective lines are not the only way to create depth. You can also overlap items on top of each other, use atmospheric perspective to tint the colors and simplify textures in the distance. Here I'm using my flat edge brush to paint most of this piece, including the clouds and sharp details. For elements in the distance, I'm tilting my stylus and using it at light pressure to create surfaces that don't have a lot of detail but still retain the same look in the texture as my foreground elements. That is the whole optical blending trick. You can use these sort of tricks with many brushes, not just mine, but it's crucial to understand the concept of brush character. And to learn that, I recommend watching this video.